This is my video blog on Flickering Pixels, chapters 6 through 10. And the thing that I really agreed with Shane Hips on this is when he talks about in chapter 8 about conversion being more of a process rather than an immediate turning on and off of a switch. Um, I definitely think that the idea of conversion of salvation can be a process, which is really similar to, I find the Eastern Orthodox Church really interesting because they believe like salvation has already happened for an individual, it's happening and it will happen. So the idea is that they recognize that it's very it's more of a process rather than just like on and off, which many evangelicals view it as. He kind of talked about how basically if you say you believe in Jesus Christ, then boom, you receive salvation, and that's the difference between um, being saved or not, or you know, being in right relationship with Jesus. And I think that that's definitely prevalent today. Even though sometimes as Christians, we need to recognize that it's a process and it's not so simple as like one, two, three steps, because that's not normally how a relationship works. And he kind of talked about too how I believe the printing, he talked about that, like the idea of a printing press, yeah, categorization and stuff like that had a big emphasis in our culture and how we view that things. And so the evangelical movement was very saturated in that ideology. There is something that I disagreed with him though, and that would be at the end of chapter 7. He's talking about how, with a postmodern culture, how important um, images are and pictures are, and how it like ruins our imagination, or it starts like degrading it, or dissolving. There we go, dissolving our imagination. So we don't have as much of an elaborate imagination as we could, because basically the idea is that when we see a picture, he used an image of the boy is sad, or a saying, the boy is sad, and that your mind can begin to depict what this boy might look like. Then he showed a picture of a boy crying, and now all of our questions and all our imagination has been answered by this one picture. And he said that it also by postmodern are more looking about like the example, the authenticity, almost like, yeah, sure, you might believe something but you're not showing it, so you don't really believe it, kind of thing with faith. And he said this is really having to do with postmodern culture, and I would disagree with him in the sense of, I think it was even in pre-modern culture. You look at Jesus preaching, we can tell your works, your fruit, by your faith. We when we look at a person's fruit, we see their faith and their belief. And so even back then in Jesus' day, 2,000 years ago, before postmodern culture was even a thought in any human mind, we get this idea. And even with Thomas, that he even talks about in the next chapter, the idea that Thomas wanted a visual thing. He didn't want to just take, Jesus basically saying, I'm risen, I'm right in front of you. He wants to actually tangibly touch it and view Christ's wounds. And then also, we can even see it in the Middle Ages, with churches and their artwork. The idea of like the Gothic times, and like basically for the illiterate, they were able to look at pictures within a church and use their imagination to understand what was actually happening, what the pictures were depicting, the life of Christ and the gospel and what the Bible taught, rather than just written word. So I would disagree with him a little bit, because I say that was pretty prevalent early on, even before the Enlightenment and kind of the modern era. So even though I disagree with him, that there is something that I appreciated in his writing in that chapter, which helps me on my final project, which would be understanding that since I'm doing a video, postmodern, um, I'm aiming for high schoolers, so they're so saturated in postmodern culture that this video can actually be, I guess, a good way of communication of the message of Christ with the incarnation. And I'm using that idea of fire. And so I'm making a video of fire kindling fire, and yet they're the same thing. So that's how the incarnation kind of happened with Christ. It's a pretty good analogy, but since I'm speaking it, if I spoke it to them, some of them might grasp it, some of them might not, because they actually need a visual image of it. So it's just encouraging from Shane Hipp's writing that the video would be very valuable for reaching high schoolers. So that is my consensus on Shane Hipp's Flickering Pixels, chapters 6 through 10.